Hey, Hawkeye fans, Chad Leistikow of the Des Moines Register, along with my good friend and colleague Kennington Smith of the Register, and we are talking Iowa football against number 4 Michigan this week. Kennington does not get too much bigger than this at Kinnick Stadium. I know we had a top 5 matchup last year, but before we get into our first three downs, I guess just to set the table, it's just so it's you don't get these opportunities very often to get a top 5 team in your own building, and Iowa has that chance this week. It's to me, it's a really exciting proposition.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that it's happened 2 years in a row, it almost makes it seem like it's common, but to your point, it's not. And I think that at least from the outside, the ante is upped a little bit, considering that these teams met less than a year ago in the Big Ten championship. Obviously, it did not go Iowa's way, and that was playing in the athletic facility. When we walked in for our presser, they said they play a few games out of the week, but that Michigan game was on there, and it was just kind of like a reminder that the last time that these teams played, the result was not close. And we might get into that a little bit later about, maybe the score doesn't reflect exactly how close it was for maybe 2 quarters or 3 quarters, but at the end of it, it was a 39-point defeat. And Spencer Petras said today that he can't remember the last time he lost by that many points, or anybody on the team can't remember the last time they lost by that many points. So it's something that's percolating in their minds, even if they won't outwardly say it. And Kirk Ferentz said that he's not promoting this as a revenge game, but you kind of have to think about the way that Michigan kind of ran it up a little bit in the fourth quarter. There might be a little bit of a bad blood internally, and they're going to come into Kinnick, and the fans are going to get a chance to let them know how they feel about that. And I'm sure they're going to be rocking very similarly to last year's game against Penn State. I mean, they're going to try to rattle Michigan and be on top of them. It's going to be a big test for Michigan. And I think for Iowa, after 2 weeks of progress, it seems like, especially on offense, when you think about they played Nevada, who's one of the worst teams in the country, but then they played a legit Big Ten team in Rutgers, and they showed progress there. Now they're getting a chance to test themselves against one of the true elite teams in the country. So you kind of have like the all levels of the spectrum there to kind of test yourself. I think it's an exciting opportunity for them, and I think we're going to know and learn a lot about this Iowa team based on what we see on Saturday.
Absolutely. We're going to talk more about the Michigan matchup in our second down. As always, we're going to try to keep these 3 topics around the 10-minute mark each. And our first down topic today, Kennington, we always try to pick the most newsy topic, I guess, out of Kirk Ferentz's news conference. And I don't think we both agreed that number 1 today had to be a discussion about the Jestin Jacobs season-ending injury. First of all, just a super unfortunate situation for the young man. I mean, here's a guy that kind of waited his turn. And I know he got a lot of playing time last year, but I think the thought was this year was going to be a real premier rotation, especially with Dane Belton gone to the NFL. It was going to be a lot of 4-3 and a lot of Jestin Jacobs, and that Jacobs would be playing inside a lot as well, maybe giving Seth Benson or Jack Campbell a rest so that they would have 3 great linebackers in there at all, 2 great linebackers in there at all times, and all of them getting rest at minimum. Now that luxury is gone for the Hawkeyes. That season that Jestin thought he was probably going to have did not even really get started. He got hurt early against South Dakota State, came back. It looked to me he got hurt on the interception return touchdown by Cooper DeJean. So the guy didn't even get to play a full 4 quarters this year, and he's done for the year. We don't know exactly the extent of the injury. But just want to send our thoughts and prayers to Jestin because it's a tough situation, especially for someone with his elite talent level and the fact that he's waited so long and the fact that he came here to spurn an Ohio State offer to kind of prove himself at Iowa, and they were going to play in Columbus in 3 weeks. It all just adds up to me to be just a heartbreaking situation.
Yeah, 100%. And to your point, the rotation was happening in that first game against South Dakota State. We saw Jestin Jacobs inside with Jack Campbell in it, and it really did seem like he was due for a breakout year. And to your point, he played a lot last year, and he was not a full-time starter. Yeah, Pro Football Focus and other national pundits had him as one of the best linebackers in the country. And it's not inconceivable to think that with a fully healthy year, rotating inside and outside, that he could have been one of the top linebackers taken in next year's draft. So he really was just kind of due for that breakout year. And it really is unfortunate. Great teammate. I'm thinking back to the Iowa State game, I believe it was, where Logan Klemp, his backup, recovered a fumble. I think it was the Kayvon strip at the goal line, and Logan recovered it. And you could just see Jestin just all over Logan on the sideline, just like, punching his chest in a playful way, giving him hugs, just so happy for him. So somebody who's really loved on the team is somebody who is, engaged in the meeting rooms and on the sideline and everything, whether he's healthy or not. So it's just really unfortunate. You want to see the best players out there, and you wanted to see Jestin kind of live out the dreams and kind of fulfill the expectations that he had for himself and the team had for himself. And unfortunately, he's not going to be able to do that. So like you said, we're just praying for him and praying for his family.
Yeah, and obviously, like I said, Kirk Ferentz did not share details. A lot of times in this situation, let's say it is an ACL. We don't know that for sure at this very moment, but ACL would be, the typical type of season-ending injury that would be a 6 to 8 month recovery. And I guess I criticize myself here for asking Kirk Ferentz the question a little bit clunkily, maybe a little poorly, but I just asked him, is it a long enough term injury where it's going to impact the NFL draft? Which, you can do the math. That's like 6-7 months away. And, Ferentz kind of looked at me, just like, well, all I really care about is Iowa, Michigan. But I was more concerned with the player with that question. I don't think that came across, and I don't think he was dismissing me in that sense, but it was I think almost a formality, at least among even Seth Wallace, the coaches, that it was probably going to be Jestin Jacobs' final year at Iowa. And so that leads us into the question of what his future does hold. We don't know that for sure. And this could potentially impact whether he's even able to perform at the combine if he wanted to go pro, or does he maybe look at this as an opportunity to return to school for a 5th year and be that premier linebacker, maybe for the Hawkeyes next year, hopefully, in 2023, where he's the new Jack Campbell, because they really like Jay Higgins. I could see a fully healthy Jacobs and Jay Higgins inside. That sounds pretty appetizing next year, but who knows? That may not be what Jestin wants, but I'm sure the wheels are turning in his head, and he's not even wanting to think about that stuff yet. But it is a reality that this does not come at the greatest time for him, with probably the path that he envisioned.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, this is happening elsewhere in the country. Texas A&M, their best receiver, Anaya Smith, suffered a season-ending injury. And the conversation that we're having right now is kind of the conversation that he's having, where he could come back for another year, but he's likely going to move on. And they're kind of looking at the timeline. I think Jimbo Fisher said something like he will be able to perform at the combine and be healthy enough, when the draft time comes around. I'm thinking about Michigan's David Ojabo last year, who got hurt during Pro Day. And he was still a second-round pick, but he kind of lost some money on the valuation just because he's not going to be healthy, right away. And I understand he played a full year, but these are things that do happen, and these are things that players and GMs do have to kind of weigh the pros and the cons. I do think you bring up a really interesting point about opportunity for him to come back healthy and do pretty much, anything he wanted to in Iowa's defense next year. He could play inside. There might be a chance for him to split outside and rush the pass or play outside, depending on what they have inside depth there at the linebacker position. So there's a lot of possibilities there for sure. But I think that's something that, he's going to have to decide, several months from now. He's not going to have to make a decision, I feel like, at least until January. So maybe there will be more information then that he'll be able to kind of, process from teams and get feedback and all of that. So, either way, obviously it's unfortunate at this moment, but at least from my vantage point, I feel like, ultimately he's going to be okay down the road, whether he decides to go to the NFL and the team's still going to draft him or he can come back to Iowa and play it out and maybe even be a first-round pick in 2024 with the fully healthy season.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. There's no shortage of guys that go into the draft injured. It may hurt their draft stock, but I could definitely see Jestin Jacobs still going to the draft and not even able to do combine stuff and still be drafted because he is that talented. A little bit untapped, I guess, and just doesn't have that high snap count either. So maybe he doesn't have as much mileage as some other players. But anyway, one last question. We got to move on to our next one here in a sec, but short term, to me, this just it's kind of like this conversation we had with the back five, where you couldn't really afford another injury. That's kind of where I feel like Iowa is at. I know they're pretty deep at linebacker. They like Jay Higgins. They like Kyler Fisher. They like Carson Shire, and Logan Klemp's getting a few snaps as well. However, the elite guys you need out there for these big matchups. So I feel like it's going to have to be a lot of Campbell, a lot of Benson the rest of the way, and those guys are going to have to hold up.
Yeah, definitely. It's going to look a lot like last year, where it seemed like those two were just the staples inside. I think that the difference between this year and last year is obviously there's no Dane Belton in that real stability at that cash position, where you have another elite NFL level player next to them. Sebastian Castro showed some good things against Rutgers, but this is likely going to be his second start against Michigan. We didn't get into Terry Roberts, but he's questionable for Saturday's game against Michigan. So it looks like Cooper's going to play a lot of corner, which opens the door for Castro. So to your point about the back end, about not needing more injuries, I mean, they are at that point where, it's Cooper and Riley at the cornerback spots, and then you have Sebastian at the cash spot. And then behind them, there's a lot of uncertainty about who might be the backup cash to Castro. And, TJ Hall and Jamison Hines, a true freshman and a redshirt freshman behind the cornerbacks. So Iowa's defense is performing really well right now, but it is to that point now where the injuries are starting to pile up, and it's starting to thin out behind the frontline starters.
And on the injury front, no Keegan Johnson this week for the Hawkeyes. So the wide receivers are very, very thin again. Arlen Bruce was gimpy last week. Nico Regaini was, old habits die hard, he didn't look himself quite, I think, last week. So I think it's fair to say he's still coming back from that foot injury. And Terry Roberts, it sounds like he's questionable this week. That hurts Iowa on punt coverage, kick coverage. That's a huge loss beyond the 4-2-5 where he's out at corner. So yeah, it's a little bit of a walking wounded here for the Hawkeyes, but they're going to have to try to do their best this week. They've still got a lot of star players, and that leads us into our second down topic, Kennington, which is, and I want to lean on you for this topic because you wrote the kind of Michigan scouting report, if you will. How good is this Michigan team really? Kirk Ferentz talked them up like they're the 42-3 team from last year. I watched their game against Maryland. I mean, they look like a very good team, but that was not the team that the beat Ohio State, handily last year and rolled the Hawkeyes before getting dumped by your Bulldogs. But what just your feel on this team? You did the scouting report. How is this kind of like could get boat raced if things go bad, or is this one Iowa can keep close?
Yeah, I think Iowa can keep it close. There is still boat racing potential, but I think that this Michigan team is different from last year's team. I think that last year's team was so much elite defense. They had great defensive line play, that great pass rushers, the Aiden Hutchinsons, the Ojabos. They had Daxton Hill in the secondary. And I think this year is much more of that kind of offensive juggernaut when you think about what J.J. McCarthy brings to the table versus Cade McNamara. And we asked Kirk Ferentz, what's the difference between McNamara and McCarthy? Do you see a difference between those teams? And he said that you can make the argument that they're better with McCarthy, and I would agree with that. I mean, you just think about the big explosive playability that Michigan has this year versus last year. Just to highlight an example, McNamara's career yards per attempt is 7.5. Well, right now, J.J. McCarthy leads the nation with 11.6 yards per attempt. I mean, they are stretching the field, and they have three receivers who are averaging 15 yards per catch, and they still have the ability to run the ball at a very high clip with Blake Corum. So it's still a very good team. I think that defensively they're not what they were, but they're able to score points at a much higher clip than they were last year. I think that when you're talking about a potential 42-3 or something like that blowout, I think it's more so just on how many times is Iowa's offense going to be able to sustain long drives. I think that in a vacuum, Iowa's defense is good enough to hold Michigan at bay and keep the game close. But if the offense is just going to 3 and out, or a 5-play drive, 4-play drive consecutively and allow Michigan to rack up that time of possession and to rack up the advantage in total plays, Think about the Iowa State game where they ran almost 30 more plays than Iowa. They held the ball twice as long. If it's something like that with Michigan in this offense, I mean, it's only a matter of time before big plays are going to happen against Iowa's defense. So there is potential to keep the game close, but a lot of it is going to depend on Iowa's ability to sustain drives offensively, keep Michigan off the field, and give their defense a rest.
Great stuff there, Kennington. Yeah, the Hawkeyes we have not mentioned are 10.5-point underdogs. So certainly a sizable underdog situation. However, getting back into today's conversation, Kennington, there was a lot of talk about, well, the Hawkeyes have done it before, top 5 team coming in here. They're 5-1 in their last 6 games dating back to 2008. And a lot of those games, Iowa was a monster underdog, including in 2016 against the Wolverines. So I kind of posed this question in my thoughts column. I'd be curious on your thoughts. Okay, in 2016, Iowa, obviously beat Michigan 14-13 as a 24-point underdog. In 2017, Ohio State came in here, as everyone knows. Iowa was a 21-point underdog. They won by 31 points, 55-24. So 2 very unexpected outcomes in those situations. At some point, though, my theorizing is these opponents now are no longer like, okay, we're going to roll over Iowa. They're like, and Jim Harbaugh even referenced it this week. It's like, we're going to like, this is like a very, very dangerous situation. And our guys are completely aware of it. So there will be no letdown this week at Kinnick. That's the feel I'm getting from Michigan here. However, what are your thoughts on kind of the potential top 5 magic that could happen on Saturday?
Yeah, I think there's something to that. I mean, the home field advantage that Iowa has, I don't think can be overstated. I mean, you look at what happened last year with the Penn State game, the amount of false starts that they were able to rack up. I'm thinking about the season opener against South Dakota State. I mean, no disrespect to them, but they're not Michigan and Ohio State, yet the crowd was so into the game that they forced 9 false start penalties in that game. So I'm just imagining what the electricity is going to be like, at least early on in the stadium. Think that they will be able to ride that momentum a little bit and perhaps rattle Michigan. And I think that going back to how good this Michigan team is, they're a great team, but this is a test for them also. I mean, you look at the first 3 teams that they played, Colorado State, Hawaii, and UConn. If you're into the ESPN Power Football Index, out of 131 possible teams, those were the 125th, 128th, and 129th teams that Michigan rolled over. I mean, they rolled some of the worst teams in the country, and they struggled a little bit even against Maryland, who the index will probably have, the index has them above Iowa, but I don't think that they're a better team in totality than Iowa is. So I think this is the best team that Michigan is going to play. Their first road game of the year. It's going to be a tough environment for them as well. And I think that, to your point about them not being on a letdown or coming in overconfidently, I think the fact that they struggled a little bit against Maryland kind of brought them down to earth a little bit and let them know that they do have some things that they need to work on as well. So I expect them to come into this game focused. But, to your point, and this was another conversation throughout the availability today with the players, is what is it about these top 5 matchups that kind of gets the players up for it? I think that the Iowa, I don't know if it's the Iowa way or just kind of the program culture, but just a lot of guys who might have been under recruited or overlooked in the process, or the fact that Iowa is consistently an underdog in these big games. I think that they lean on that a lot in these type of matchups, and that kind of carries them through and motivates them. And there's a certain level of energy that they play with. So I expect both teams to come out and play well and execute at the highest level that they can. They want to go out there and play hard, of course, but I think Iowa understands what's at stake here and what they're going to have to do to win this game, and it's going to take their best game of the season and then some to pull this upset.
Yeah, I always enjoy listening to the players on Tuesdays before we get Kirk. Sometimes the dynamic can be awkward because you haven't heard from the head coach about injuries, and that one week. We had to ask Spencer Petras, say, are you starting this week? Yeah, I guess so. I think so. So it can be a little make for awkward, but also kind of gives you an early glimpse of kind of talking points that you can tell are coming through. And the one you pointed out, Kennington, about, hey, these Michigan schools, the Ohio State you're going to see in a few weeks, they didn't want, you weren't good enough for them. They didn't want you. And Petras said, they very much believe that they are every bit as good as Michigan and that they can win this football game. I asked Blair Sanderson at Hawkeye Report. I want to give him a shout out. On that quote, I reached out to him because he does this feature every week for Tom's website and about the recruiting process and who was recruited. And he came up with the list of Hawkeyes that were offered by Michigan. And it was bigger than I thought, Kennington. And 12 players have held a Michigan offer at one time, including 5 first stringers, which are John Wagner, Logan Lee, Gavin Williams, Bo Stevens, and Connor Colby. So all of them were highly regarded out of high school. The other players on the roster with a Michigan offer include Deontay Craig, David Davidkoff, Jazian Patterson, TJ Hall, Cohen Entringer, and Xavier Wampa, of course. So that's a little bit, some of those younger guys did get a little Michigan love, but the guys that are actually playing for the most part, we're under-recruited guys. I mean, heck, Jack Campbell didn't have much interest. Riley Moss certainly didn't have interest. Cooper DeJean, not a lot of interest, which is crazy. You go down the line, Sam Laporta, Kayvon Merriweather, who I'm doing a story on this week. You can see Ferentz kind of tapping into that, I feel like, this week. And then I feel like Kayvon sort of indicated that Phil Parker is not really happy about this 39-point loss that happened last year because, as we all know, Phil Parker is a Michigan State guy. I don't think he likes Michigan at all. And so that all kind of combines, I think, to a little bit of the animosity. And I like what you brought up there about I know I'm rambling here, about what was it? The running up the score at the end. And there's no question that occurred, and they were doing that for the playoff or whatever, but and that's going to happen. So, but still, Iowa players, it's still fresh in their minds. Anyway, I know we got to move on to third down here, Kennington, so I'm going to cut off the conversation there and move into this topic. And we decided to go back to the quarterbacks here with third down. And you kind of wrote this question, and I like how you phrased it, so I'm just going to read it to you and let you go. Is now the time for Spencer Petras to be fairly evaluated?
Right. So this question comes from something that Kirk said in his presser today, where the idea that Iowa's offense right now is pretty much the offense that they were coming into the season with. Obviously, Keegan Johnson not being a part of it right now is a huge component. Deontay Vines was injured as well, but I mean, he said on multiple occasions the fact that Gavin Williams and LeSean Williams were healthy at the same time is huge for the offense. Caleb Johnson has emerged, so you have your 3 running backs. Nico Ragaini is getting healthy. See, I almost got caught there. I had to catch myself, but he's starting to get healthy. Brody Brecht is in the mix. Arlen Bruce has played in every game, so you have almost your full complement of receivers, or at least your top guys. Your 2 tight ends haven't missed any games, and the offensive line is what it is, but they're starting to gain a little bit of momentum. So Kirk said that pretty much what he was saying a few weeks ago was all of those things were not in place when Spencer was really struggling, and he felt like he couldn't fairly evaluate him then. So that's where this question is coming from. Like, they have pretty much all their guys, minus Keegan. Is now the time that if he really starts to struggle, Michigan is obviously going to be a huge challenge. But let's say Illinois game, multiple turnovers, maybe Iowa lose that game, but anything that could happen. Is that the time to where you can put more fire up under Kirk Ferentz, or even reopen the question about evaluating all of the quarterbacks, given that the reasons why he was struggling early on are not currently present anymore.
Yeah, great points. And my feeling is that Kirk Ferentz was I don't want to say spiking the ball in the end zone, because I don't think he was actually doing that, but he kind of brought that up when Scott asked him about the quarterback situation. That's why I told you 2 weeks ago, we basically said that we weren't ready to make an evaluation on him. But now that we've seen him perform better these last 2 weeks, you've seen other things get better around him. And I don't think there's any debating the fact that the offensive line is playing better. I thought the right guard play was good from both Bo Stevens and Tyler Ellsbury. And we will get a chance to talk to George Barnett on Wednesday as our assistant coach available. So that will be enlightening. We'll get more on that on our radio show tomorrow night on Hawk Central. And my last point on Spencer Petras is he had his highest rated. He was the highest rated Hawkeye by Pro Football Focus of any player on the field. That includes Cooper DeJean. So that's pretty impressive because he was the absolute lowest rated player against South Dakota State. You can quibble with PFF's rankings, obviously, but it is a little bit of a benchmark. The fact that they rated him that highly, I think it was like an 88, something like that. It was higher than any defensive player. So in their minds, he had a good game. And when I rewatched the tape, he even got out of pressure a little bit. I thought his throws to Luke Lachey in particular were incredibly decisive. And I thought maybe outside of the Laporta deep shot, I thought maybe his best throw of the day was just a simple 14-yard screen to LeSean Williams in the fourth quarter on that Drew Stevens field goal drive. It was a very impressive read at the line of scrimmage. It was the easy type of yards that you thought you maybe were going to get with Spencer. So I was pretty high on him, relatively speaking, coming out of the Rutgers game. So I think he's feeling like there's some momentum there. I think the offense feels like we got our guy in Petras. I was half curious if he was maybe going to be a captain today. He was not, same four captains. But I don't know. My read on it is they're more validated than ever that Petras is their guy based on what's happened the last 2 weeks. And in essence, they're going to, the leash continues to be very, very long for him, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But, on that same token, I think that now opens it up for perhaps more harsh criticism. And I feel like not only from you and myself, I feel like the entire Iowa media contingent has been very critical of Spencer. They've been very critical of the offense, and Kirk Ferentz has pushed back on that. Players have pushed back on that at times based on the circumstances. But I feel like if there was ever a time for the same level of criticism or perhaps even an elevated degree of that, it will be right now, given that, the offense is full tilt health-wise, relatively speaking. I asked Kirk Ferentz about the confidence of the offense, the fact that they had a good game against Nevada. People from the outside might scoff for that because Nevada's not very good, but they followed that up with a good offensive performance, relative to expectations against Rutgers. The statistics wouldn't tell you that it was a great day, but you'd have to watch the game and understand the flow of the game and all of that. They had a good day and they showed some good things. So are 2 consecutive good games building confidence, and are you seeing that manifested in the early days of this week? And he said that, for the most part, he feels like the pieces are coming together. A lot of it is young players having to just go out there and play, feel things, experience things, and he feels like they're making a step. I asked Spencer Petras the same thing, and he said that he felt like there were some guys who maybe aren't making the same mistakes in week 4 of the season that they were making in week 1, whether that be in practice or in games, or maybe they're even making in fall camp. So they've built up a little bit of momentum. I think obviously that's going to be tested against Michigan, who Kirk said was an NFL defense today or something.
Yeah. Something to that regard. Yeah, it sounded like they're playing, Bill Belichick's vintage New England Patriots. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's pretty much my point. I mean, I just feel like they've garnered some momentum. They've shown some good things. This weekend is going to be, I feel like every week I specifically have said this week is a test. This week is a test. This week is a test. And Michigan is a test, but I feel like this is the test relative to the other teams that they've played, because Iowa wants to go to the Big Ten championship. That is their goal. That's their benchmark. In order to not only go to the Big Ten championship, but to have a better result than last year's game, they're going to have to play on par with teams like Michigan. So they struggled for 2 weeks. They've done good things for the last 2 weeks. Now this is an opportunity, against one of the elite teams. And here's a statistic I'll throw out. I shared this with you, and I know that you kind of preface this with, take Pro Football Focus as gospel or with a grain of salt, depending on what side of the fence you're on. But the 2 highest graded defenses in the country through 4 weeks are Iowa at 93.5 and Michigan at 93.1. So this is about as difficult of a challenge that I was going to see defensively. Let's see what the offense looks like. And I think that's going to tell us a lot about this team.
Yeah, great point. And just in closing here, as we hit the 30-minute mark, Iowa only gets 4 Big Ten home games this year. This is the year they have 5 roads, 4 homes, and Michigan is one of them. So you got to cash in at home. Iowa's done some good work now. They got a big road win at Rutgers. They closed the month 3-1. This is a major opportunity, as you say, not just to beat a top 5 team, but to put yourself in the conversation to get back to Indianapolis, because the schedule is difficult for the Hawkeyes, and they're going to need every win they can, because if you think about Ohio State coming in 3 weeks, that's probably an L, probably. We don't know for sure, but you can't afford too many L's if you're going to go to the Big Ten title game. And we know how, Purdue, Wisconsin, Minnesota, all in November, back to back to back. Those are all tricky spots for the Hawkeyes. So this is a big game in that regard too, and certainly motivation is not lacking. Give you a final 10 seconds here, Kennington, to sign off.
I'll just say read our content on Hawk Central. I did a story about injuries and kind of the mentality of Iowa's defense of preparing like the starter. There's a lot of guys who are going to have to do that. And it was cool to talk to guys like Logan Klimt was available today for the first time. So interesting. It was cool to get his thoughts on just kind of the perspective of backups and all of that. So go read that. Chad, you had your thoughts today, and you're going to have a really cool feature on Kayvon Merriweather coming up soon. So just stay locked into Hawk Central. And I appreciate y'all for watching.
Thank you, Kennington, for the Merriweather plug. Looking forward to it. I just got to write it. Just got to write it first, and then I'll let you know if it's good. Thank you, Kennington Smith, for Kennington. I'm Chad Leistikow of the Des Moines Register. We will talk to you on our radio show Wednesday night, and make sure to catch the post-game podcast after Saturday's 11 a.m. game against Michigan on Fox. Talk to you later.